Welcome to my YouTube channel Motiversity, ladies and gentlemen. There are moments in life when the walls of a relationship begin to close in, not from love or intimacy, but from a slow suffocation of the soul. Carl Jung, a master of understanding the unconscious mind, would say that these walls are often built from the bricks of projection, shadow, and unspoken wounds. In a toxic relationship, what once felt like partnership morphs into a battlefield where both parties unconsciously hurl their insecurities at each other. The first sign is that you lose your sense of self. You no longer feel like you, but rather, like a reflection of what your partner wants you to be. This is not love. This is control. The second sign is the constant presence of blame. Instead of shared responsibility, one person always carries the weight of fault, while the other absolves themselves, like a judge passing sentences in a courtroom of two. Then there is the feeling of walking on eggshells, where honesty feels dangerous, and silence becomes a survival strategy. Emotional suppression becomes a daily ritual, and laughter feels like a distant memory. In the fourth sign, Jung's theory of projection unfolds. You start seeing your worst fears, your unacknowledged flaws, not in yourself, but in your partner. It's not that they embody these traits, but rather that they mirror your shadow, reflecting what you refuse to confront within. The fifth sign is the loss of growth. In a healthy relationship, partners encourage each other's dreams, but in a toxic one, aspirations are mocked or belittled. Your journey toward wholeness is stifled, leaving you fragmented and hollow. Then comes the erosion of trust. The sixth sign. Lies, half-truths, and manipulations slowly eat away at the foundation of the relationship. Without trust, love withers, like a flower denied sunlight. And finally, the seventh sign is a persistent, gnawing feeling of dread. You begin to fear your partner's moods, their reactions, their presence itself. It's as if the relationship has become a cage, locking you away from your own potential. Jung believed that relationships are mirrors for the soul's growth, but when the mirror is cracked, what we see can distort us, entangle us in a web of shadow projections and unhealed wounds. Recognizing these signs is not an end, but a beginning, the first step toward reclaiming your power, your voice, and your authentic self. For in every toxic pattern lies an invitation to awaken, to heal, and to become whole again. And the silent theater of human connection, the first act is often written by forces unseen. It is the subtle pull of unconscious drives, the deep yearning for completion, the intricate dance of light and shadow within the psyche. When two souls meet, they are not simply two individuals exchanging glances and words. They are complex, multifaceted beings, each carrying their own inner world, an amalgamation of desires, fears, dreams, and wounds. And yet in this intricate dance, something dangerous can occur. The relationship, which holds the potential for mutual growth and understanding, can transform into a struggle for dominance, a quiet war for power where the true self is sacrificed. Upon the altar of control, this battle is rarely fought in the open. It lurks beneath the surface, hidden in the subtleties of language, in the tone of voice, in the small gestures that say so much more than words ever could. It is in the way one partner may interrupt the other's thoughts, dismiss their feelings as trivial, or assert their own perspective as the only truth worth considering. The struggle for power emerges not as a declaration of war, but as a slow erosion of one's ability to think, feel, and express freely. In such a relationship, love becomes a currency for control. Affection is given or withheld based on obedience, compliance, and submission to the other's needs and expectations. The warmth of love is no longer unconditional but contingent, i.e., reward for playing by the unspoken rules that maintain the delicate balance of control. This dynamic creates a subtle form of captivity, where one feels the need to monitor every word, every action, lest they provoke displeasure or disapproval. Authenticity becomes dangerous. The fear of conflict, of withdrawal, of emotional coldness, forces one to wear a mask, to perform, rather than to live. The natural flow of emotions is dammed, and what was once a vibrant river of expression becomes a stagnant pool of suppressed desires and unmet needs. In this space, one loses sight of their own boundaries, their own voice, their own identity. They become an echo, a reflection of the other's will, and slowly, they begin to forget the sound of their own soul. The power struggle is not always loud or overt. It often manifests as subtle manipulation, a suggestion framed as care, a demand disguised as concern, a withdrawal of affection framed as necessary for the other's growth. It can be a quiet undermining of the other's confidence, a persistent questioning of their choices, or a subtle framing of their needs as unreasonable or excessive. The result is a slow, insidious erosion of self-esteem, a quiet conditioning that teaches the individual to second-guess themselves, to doubt their own instincts, to believe that their perspective is flawed, and that the other's is superior. Yet, beneath this struggle for power lies a deeper truth, the suppression of the authentic self. In a relationship where power dynamics dominate, there is no room for true expression. The self must be shaped, edited, and muted to fit the expectations and demands of the other. The natural flow of emotions, joy, anger, sadness, excitement, becomes a source of danger rather than connection. Every feeling must be evaluated for its impact on the other's mood, every word weighed for its potential to disrupt the fragile balance of control. The self becomes a performance, a curated version designed to please, to appease, to avoid conflict at all costs. This suppression creates a profound disconnection, not only from the partner, but from one's own inner world. The individual becomes a stranger to their own desires, their own feelings, their own truth. They learn to prioritize the needs and emotions of the other, sacrificing their own in the process. The relationship becomes a stage, and the person, an actor playing a role they never auditioned for, following a script they never wrote. The cost of this suppression is immense. A deep sense of emptiness, a gnawing dissatisfaction, a quiet grief for the self that has been silenced. In the absence of authentic self-expression, resentment grows. The soul, deprived of its voice, begins to protest in subtle ways, through irritability, withdrawal, or a vague sense of restlessness. There may be moments of rebellion, flashes of anger, or tears that flow without clear reason. These are the whispers of a self longing to be heard, the signals of a soul suffocating under the weight of a relationship that has become a cage. Yet often these signals are ignored, dismissed as irrational, or blamed on external circumstances. The person may convince themselves that their discontent is their own fault, that they are too sensitive, too demanding, too much. They internalize the belief that if only they could change, everything would be better. This is the trap of a toxic relationship. It teaches you to silence your own voice, to doubt your own worth, and to believe that your pain is a burden rather than a message. The second thread woven into this tapestry of toxicity is the failure to honor the process of individuation, the journey of becoming a whole, authentic self. In a healthy relationship, there is space for both individuals to grow, to explore, to challenge themselves and each other, and to walk the path of self-discovery. But in a toxic dynamic, this process is stunted. The relationship demands conformity, not growth. One partner's evolving sense of self is seen as a threat rather than a source of mutual enrichment. The exploration of new ideas, hobbies, or ways of thinking is met with suspicion, criticism, or dismissal. The subtle message is clear. Stay as you are, because your change makes me uncomfortable. And so, the individual begins to shrink. Their world becomes smaller, their dreams dimmer, their sense of possibility more limited. This suppression of growth is not always imposed by explicit words or rules. It is often conveyed through subtle emotional cues, raised eyebrows, sighs of disapproval, sarcastic remarks that seem harmless on the surface, but carry an undercurrent of disdain. It is in the small discouragements that one learns not to pursue certain interests, not to express certain thoughts, not to challenge the status quo. Over time, the individual internalizes these cues and becomes complicit in their own diminishment. They convince themselves that their desires are impractical, their dreams unrealistic, their passions frivolous. They may even begin to feel guilty for wanting more, for yearning for something beyond the confines of the relationship. Yet the desire for growth, for individuation, is not a luxury. it is a necessity. It is the very impulse of life itself, the call to become whole, to integrate the various facets of the self, to move toward greater complexity and depth. When this process is denied, something essential within withers. The person may continue to go through the motions of life, but there is a deadness, a flatness, an absence of vitality. The colors fade, the music grows quiet, the world feels smaller and less inviting. The relationship, rather than being a source of support and inspiration, becomes a weight, an anchor that holds them back from their own unfolding. The suppression of individuation in a toxic relationship is a quiet tragedy, for it not only diminishes the individual, but also the relationship itself. When both partners are free to grow, to explore, to change, the relationship can evolve alongside them, becoming richer, deeper, and more resilient. But when one partner demands stagnation, the relationship becomes brittle, unable to adapt to the natural rhythms of life. It becomes a static tableau, beautiful perhaps in its predictability but lifeless. And in the end, the soul longs for movement, for transformation, for the freedom to become. When this freedom is denied, the relationship becomes a prison, not one made of bars and chains but of silent agreements, unspoken rules, and the slow, suffocating weight of a life unlived. In the quiet depths of the soul, there are forces that move unseen, shaping our relationships in ways we do not always understand. Among these forces, projection stands as one of the most potent and dangerous. It is the mechanism by which we unconsciously attribute our own hidden qualities, desires, and fears onto others. In a relationship, this dynamic can become particularly destructive, for it leads us away from true connection and blinds us to the reality of the person before us. When projection becomes the lens through which we perceive the other, we are no longer relating to them as they are, but rather to a distorted image of ourselves, reflected back in the mirror of our own unconscious. Projection is an ancient and universal phenomenon, arising from the simple fact that we cannot fully see ourselves. The aspects of our personality that we find unacceptable, the traits we fear or repress, do not vanish. They are disowned, pushed into the shadows of the mind, and from there they seek expression. When these disowned parts are too painful or uncomfortable to confront directly, we externalize them, seeing in others what we cannot acknowledge in ourselves. A person who is unaware of their own aggression may find themselves constantly criticizing others for being too forceful. Someone who fears their own vulnerability may perceive others as weak and needy. This is not a conscious act of deception or malice, but a natural consequence of our inability to fully hold our own complexity. In the crucible of a relationship, projection becomes a powerful and often destructive force. Partners become repositories for each other's disowned qualities, absorbing the projections like sponges and responding in ways that reinforce the dynamic. A man who has repressed his own capacity for tenderness may see his partner's emotional needs as excessive, clinging, or manipulative. A woman who fears her own assertiveness may see her partner as controlling, domineering, or cruel. And as these projections accumulate, the relationship becomes a theater of mutual misunderstanding, where each partner is locked in battle, not with the other, but with the parts of themselves they cannot accept. The danger of projection lies in its invisibility. We do not recognize it for what it is. We believe that we are simply seeing the truth of the other person. And so, we react accordingly, accusing, blaming, defending, withdrawing. The partner, in turn, responds not only to the actual situation, but also to the projected qualities that have been placed upon them, often with confusion or frustration. Over time, the relationship becomes a tangle of projections and counter-projections, a web of misperceptions and emotional reactivity. What was once a space for intimacy and connection becomes a battleground of shadows, where neither partner can see the other clearly, and both feel unseen, unheard, and misunderstood. Yet within this dynamic lies a profound opportunity. For if we can pause and ask ourselves, Why does this behavior in my partner evoke such a strong reaction in me? What is it about this trait that feels so intolerable, so offensive, so unbearable? We may begin to see the reflection of our own shadow. The qualities we project onto our partner are often precisely those that we have disowned in ourselves. By recognizing this, we can begin the difficult but necessary work of reclaiming our projections, of integrating the disowned parts of the psyche, and of seeing our partner not as an extension of our own unresolved conflicts, but as a separate, unique individual with their own inner world. The process of reclaiming projection is not easy. It requires humility, courage, and a willingness to confront aspects of ourselves that we would rather keep hidden. It demands that we step out of the comfort of blame and into the discomfort of self-reflection. And it calls us to recognize that the other person is not the source of our suffering, but the mirror in which our own suffering is reflected. In doing so, we begin to transform the relationship from a stage of unconscious conflict into a crucible for self-awareness and growth. But there is another layer to the toxicity that can arise in relationships, a deeper wound that festers when the relationship stifles growth and prevents the natural unfolding of the self. A relationship that does not allow space for each partner to evolve becomes a stagnant pool rather than a flowing river. It is the very nature of life to seek expansion, to move toward greater complexity, to stretch beyond the boundaries of the known. When this impulse is suppressed, the soul withers. In a relationship, this suppression often takes the form of subtle discouragement, disinterest in the partner's passions, criticism of their ideas, or a quiet undermining of their efforts to grow. Sometimes it is more overt, with one partner explicitly forbidding or mocking the other's dreams. Either way, the result is the same: a gradual shrinking of the self, a slow erosion of vitality and possibility. When a partner's growth is seen as a threat rather than a joy, the relationship becomes a cage rather than a sanctuary. The individual may find themselves hesitating before sharing a new idea, suppressing excitement about a new opportunity, or minimizing their own achievements for fear of provoking jealousy or criticism. They may begin to doubt their own worth, questioning whether their aspirations are valid or whether they should simply settle for what they have. In such an environment, the natural urge for self-actualization is stifled, and the relationship becomes an obstacle to growth rather than a support. The suppression of growth is often driven by fear, the fear that if the partner evolves, they will outgrow the relationship, leave, or find someone else. This fear is understandable, for change always carries the possibility of loss. But to deny growth for the sake of security is to create a fragile and brittle bond, one that cannot withstand the natural flow of life. A relationship that thrives on stasis, that resists change, becomes a tomb rather than a living, breathing connection. The partners may remain together in body, but their spirits drift apart, disconnected by the widening gap between who they are and who they are allowed to become. True love does not seek to possess or control. It seeks to support the other's unfolding, to stand as a witness and an ally to their becoming. It rejoices in the partner's triumphs, even when those triumphs lead them in new and unfamiliar directions. It offers encouragement, not criticism, curiosity, not judgment. In such a relationship, growth is not a threat, but a shared adventure, a journey into the unknown that deepens the bond rather than weakens it. When a relationship suppresses growth, it is not only the individual who suffers, but the relationship itself. For a relationship is a living system, and like all living systems, it must evolve or it will decay. When growth is denied, resentment festers, intimacy withers, and the relationship becomes hollow, a shell of what it could have been. The dreams that were once shared become sources of bitterness, and the connection that once felt alive becomes a burden, a weight that drags both partners down. But it is never too late to awaken. To see the patterns of projection and suppression is to take the first step toward change. It is an invitation to return to oneself, to reclaim the parts that have been disowned, to honor the call of growth, and to create relationships that nourish the soul rather than deplete it. The path is not easy, but it is the only path that leads to true connection, to love that is both free and faithful, and to a life that is lived in alignment with the deepest truths of the self.